The date is January 1st, 2014, and Ubisoft, for the most part, are on a 4-year run of releasing great games. In 2009, they would release Assassin's Creed 2, bringing us Ezio, one of the most profound characters in the gaming world. We can't forget Just Dance as well, that came out the same year, starting the trend of that game. Obviously, not as big now, but back then, it was massive. To be fair, it is probably still as big, but yeah, in terms of a cultural impact, not really. In 2010, they end up releasing Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, continuing on the story of Ezio and giving us general improvements to the franchise. We also got Splinter Cell Conviction. Then Ubisoft brought us Assassin's Creed Revelations and Rayman Origins in 2011, and in 2012, we ended up getting Assassin's Creed 3, which at the time was not looked at that well in comparison to what it is now, but it is looked back at now very fondly. Far Cry 3, which many consider one of the best games ever made, and a lot of the fan base look at this as the peak of the entire Far Cry franchise, came out in that year as well. Then in 2013, they brought us Assassin's Creed Black Flag, which quickly became one of the best-selling games in the entire franchise. They brought Rayman Legends out, Splinter Cell Blacklist, and Far Cry 3 got a DLC called Blood Dragon, and not to mention, if I remember this amazing game correctly, the Mighty Quest for Epic Loot. Now, it was definitely an amusing time how easily entertained we were by some of these games on this list. However, overall, the Mighty Quest for Epic Loot is a great game. Even though I've only played 16 hours of it, I just remember looking back at it fondly. Obviously, it's not a great game, it was just random fun. It's basically just a mobile game, just on a computer, which at the time, mobile games were nowhere near this quality. The lead up to 2014 was definitely strong, considering just before 2014 we got Assassin's Creed Black Flag, basically cementing this idea of Ubisoft are making great open world experiences. The highly anticipated WatchDogs have been confirmed to be releasing at the beginning of 2014, and the rumour mill for Far Cry and Assassin's Creed became bigger and bigger once 2014 had begun. 2014 was on track to become Ubisoft's best year ever. They had Far Cry 4, which would have been coming after the immensely popular Far Cry 3. Assassin's Creed Unity, meant to be bringing us next-gen experiences to the Assassin's Creed world, and then a completely new IP that they had shown off a year prior, looking outstanding at E3. And then a month before E3 2014, Watch Dogs launched. But I'll discuss all that happened next in a moment. However, first we have to talk about Ubisoft's reputation at this point in history, because 2014 Ubisoft was a very different time to modern day. As already mentioned about the games that were releasing, some of them were flops, yes, but these games did something that made people actually at least view them as trailblazers for the moment of open world games. They had such an impact that many companies to this day still use their open world game design, such as the Horizon series being the biggest other company that uses the same sort of world design as Ubisoft games. Which might sound like a bad thing, but remember, back then we didn't have games like Elden Ring to compare it to when it comes to the way a HUD is composed. But you know, there was still some of the other games out there like Skyrim and so on. However, again, they were in their own two separate lanes. Skyrim was a completely open world RPG game, whereas Ubisoft were making open world games where you weren't role-playing as a character of your choice. You were playing through a story. You're effectively playing a film. They also had one other thing on their side at the time, which was being the underdogs. The big timers at that point in history were still Bethesda, Rockstar, and Nintendo. Those were the three kind of reigning champions at the point of history. So not only were they the underdogs, they also had a good track record with decent games having been released in the past, so everything was, in a way, in their favour. Ubisoft in 2014 were not considered the scummy, money-hungry, life-draining open-world company that they are today. They were at least something better than that entire idea of what they are now. However, I wouldn't say it's necessarily an achievement, because you could basically just release a game and not shove microtransactions as heavily as they do into their games and be considered better. But the main thing that I'm basically talking about here is that they obviously were not considered as bad as they were today. So don't think that this is just irrelevant to this entire topic. But before we jump into 2014 itself, we do need to talk about E3 2013. After around 40 minutes of Ubisoft talking about what their side items are, they eventually got into the big dogs. The ones they definitely cared most about, because they knew that was where the eyeballs and the money was going to be made from. We ended up getting a trailer for Watch Dogs, and at that same E3 event, you could then actually see a gameplay demo of this game. And that exact gameplay demo is the first piece of the puzzle of Ubisoft's tainted reputation. And a lot of people might think, well, it was only a gameplay demo, it couldn't have been that bad. And you'd be correct, it wasn't underwhelming, the issue was that it was a complete facade. It was gameplay that simply just wasn't real, or at least wasn't the product that was released a year later. Now, to some they would definitely call this a scam, but for legal reasons I won't be saying that it is. I'll just leave you with what the meaning of a scam is: a dishonest scheme. Now, was showing off graphics to be better than they were a dishonest scheme? I'll let you decide on that one, but overall, the game's graphics were just absurdly good in this gameplay demo, but were nothing like the promised product later on down the line. Outside of the graphics department, I would say the game is overall enjoyable, or at least decent. Aiden is a character that I would say is understandable and a good main character. The systems in the game work well and are decent. The story is overall, again, decent, and the gameplay in general, outside of the driving, because the driving absolutely sucks, is all round great. Now, this is basically all the case of saying this game is not amazing, it's also not absolute trash. You should probably try it if you could get it on a good deal, which pretty much all the time it's on a deal of some sort where you can get it from some other company. It is actually a decent game. The driving does suck, but sadly, this was the first strike for Ubisoft. But it was not the only one they were going to be taking this year. I'll quickly mention as well, just because I think some people will probably bring it up, which is South Park: The Stick of Truth, which overall, I think the reason why this game was as successful as it was is for two reasons. One is South Park. I think that is the main overall reason. Also, we'll give Ubisoft some credit. They at least did a good job on making a game that functioned well, played well, everything like that. But I think the South Park element, the humor of South Park, and the absolute sheer size of the South Park's fanbase, especially at the time, was something that definitely made this game do even better than it could have done prior. So I do honestly think that if this game was given to any other studio, most likely it would have performed equally as well. And then you get to the latter half of 2014, the end of the year game releases, where every single company under the sun decides to release everything before the Christmas holidays. And Ubisoft were going to be releasing 3 games in particular: Assassin's Creed Unity, Assassin's Creed Rogue, and then we also got Far Cry 4. The first of these games was Assassin's Creed Unity and Rogue, which all you have to do is think about Unity to know what happened. You might not have been born until Unity's released, but you're still probably aware of the absolute haunted face that is the entire cover of what Unity is, or at least what a lot of people looked at Unity being. Rogue, on the other hand, wasn't as buggy necessarily on launch. Its remaster followed that trend, but Rogue overall was a very underwhelming game. It's a 6-hour-long game that is a decent experience if you're an AC nerd. All in all, if you don't like Assassin's Creed, or you're just not a fan necessarily of the lore of Assassin's Creed, this game is a massive waste of money. Now, I don't remember fully off the top of my head how much it was. I tried doing a load of searching around and I found one article saying that the game did cost the same amount as Unity, and I do believe that was the case, because I remember specifically the fact that my mum had to spend like £100 to get me both of these games because I was really wanting to play both of them. Which is ridiculous when you think about the fact that they sold Assassin's Creed Rogue for £50. £50 for a game that's 6 hours long is a broken DLC for Black Flag, basically. Unity was a massive buggy mess on launch, but overall, in my opinion, I think it was the type of bugs that was the issue versus how prominent they were. Based on my experience and the experience of people that I've spoken to plenty of times about this game, they never really had, and myself, had like many like over-the-top game-breaking bugs over like 5 to 6 playthroughs. I've played Unity quite a few times, and the most recent time was earlier this year where I did an entire video essay about the game, so you can go check that if you want. But again, I only really experienced a couple glitches now, and that's because they did at least try to go back and fix some of it. But overall, I'd say that the issue was at hand really when the game launched was the type of bug versus how prominent they were. It wasn't like loads of small bugs or loads of big bugs, let's say like a Cyberpunk. It was more the factor of they were so shockingly just surprising that they just blew up the internet. However, this game also has a mediocre story. I would say it's decent for the most part, but the latter half of this story completely goes off the rails and becomes misguided to kind of what was being set up in the beginning. I would still recommend the game though, especially now. Rogue, on the other hand, is a game that didn't have much in the way of bugs like I mentioned, but was supposedly made for old-gen consoles, as they felt bad for leaving those players behind, when really we know exactly what the reason was for releasing this game. It was because they were feeling bad for their shareholders that when Unity launches they may have lost out on half the player base to sell a game to. So this was strike 2. I think you could probably argue that the bugs and then the fact that they pushed a game out on last-gen gen consoles for the same price as the next gen console game that had next to no effort in comparison to Unity, and the fact that it was just a DLC for Black Flag pretty much, and a 6-hour-long game as probably the third strike. But I'm going to just say, because the games came out at the same time, it's like checking your credit score on the same day. They both just affect you literally the exact same because you're just doing it on the same day. It's classed as that day's credit score. We'll just class this as one strike because they both released on the same day. But if you know anything about the way Ubisoft games are today, you'll probably be seeing a little bit of a pattern here. And then lastly, we got Far Cry 4. Now this game overall was kind of received quite well. I would definitely say that the game is not bad in any manner. But the issue was for it, really, is that it was following up Far Cry 3. I would say that Pagan Min as a character is absolutely great, and they just kind of did everything Far Cry 3 did and just continued on the trend, and that's kind of what's happened ever since. It's something that you see within Assassin's Creed as well. They just kind of continue on doing things that they think works over and over again until it's a dead horse that literally doesn't sell them anything, or at least as many copies as they used to. So I wouldn't say that this is the final nail in the coffin, because Strike 3 comes later on. But overall, you can see how because of the release of 3 games prior to Far Cry 4, their reputation was definitely damaged. And what 2014 left us was with their cash cows of Assassin's Creed, the possible one of WatchDogs and Far Cry effectively being left in the wake of whatever happened at Ubisoft during that time to make these outcomes of games. People used to look at these franchises fondly, or at least did to a degree, and now that all went down the drain. I would say truly, the straw that broke the camel's back in this entire situation was Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which came out a year later. So again, I'd say 2015 is kind of in the same realm, but overall, I would say that Syndicate definitely broke the camel's back here, because it was just Assassin's Creed Unity, not as good as Assassin's Creed Unity, but for some reason was worse than a game that came out a year prior, was an absolute buggy mess. They dumbed down the parkour, one of the main characters was a bit irritating, and they added a grappling hook for some reason. 2014 though was already too much of a reputation hit to recover from. This is something that has still affected them to this day and tarnished their reputation. The reason all of this is important is because you need to look at the current history of the games that have come out since, and you'll see that there's a fairly decent relation between, those games and the games that have come out now. They've released either games that are misleading with their marketing, such as WatchDogs, or broken gameplay like Assassin's Creed Unity, or simply underwhelming in comparison to pretty much every other product they've released before. Some of the examples of this, in my mind, would be Assassin's Creed Valhalla, The Division, Far Cry Primal, Far Cry 6, Rainbow Six Siege in its first year specifically, but all of those games, I'd definitely say, have their upsides. For example, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a visually stunning game. I don't think anyone can argue that, but the rest of the game is absolutely lackluster. Far Cry Primal and 6 are very fun but shallow games, and then R6 is probably, in my opinion, one of the best FPS games right now that you can play. All round, I just think that it's a great experience. However, the first year was very slow, very boring. Not much really happened when you consider this was being propped up as like this idea that it was going to be like the competitor of CSGO and all these different things, and at the time, really wasn't. But all of them end up dealing with an issue in particular, either it being a not good product, misleading, or a broken game, which ends up leaving a bad taste in people's mouths. But let's talk about the future of Ubisoft, and is there any hope? Now, I don't think at any point we should be hyped for anything Ubisoft are releasing. However, that does not mean that we shouldn't be interested with a good amount of skepticism. We've got many games coming out over the next period of time, but I think we have to look at all of this through the veil of Ubisoft's marketing. So, for example, we've got things like Skull and Bones, Assassin's Creed Mirage, and a load of other projects relating to Assassin's Creed, which do include some open-world RPG games that they've at least been open about for the first time, which is actually a good step, and I'll mention this in a second. You've got the Avatar game that is in the making and it should be releasing this year, but to be honest, I'm not overly interested purely because I'm not a massive Avatar fan at all. But for you guys who love Avatar, then it'll probably be something you might be interested in. Then Settlers, to me, looks interesting. As someone who loves Civ and also enjoys Banished, I would say that this game looks like a mixture of those two. And then we also know that they're working on an open world Star Wars game, but all in all, I don't know where my expectations for that game sit, considering the previous experience of their open world games in general. They're good at making some, but the recent history of their open world titles are very questionable. Honestly though, all I need to prove that Ubisoft might be on the right track is for Assassin's Creed Mirage to actually be as they said it would be. Be honest about the game. If it turns out to be a game that they are kind of hinting at and talking about and they've spoken about at length and saying that it's meant to have things like Assassin's Creed Unity's-esque parkour system, it's meant to be something that's going back to the roots of the franchise, everything like that. If they live up to those promises that they've made through all of the different marketing, all the different discussions, then we at least know that we're now entering into an era of Ubisoft where they're hopefully being a little bit more honest and open. The issue is that I don't know how much this will be a, hey, we're doing this once, so our reputation's built up a little bit, so people now buy the next big thing. There's going to be that argument that can be made, obviously. However, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt if Mirage turns out to be something that is at least, you know, as promised. If it's not, and it's just lackluster, then I can't see their reputation ever coming back. So currently for myself, it definitely all sits on the shoulders of Mirage. If this year goes somewhat reasonable, I would definitely say Ubisoft will definitely be getting looked at in a good light. So I'm going to be hopeful, even though I don't want to be. I want to be this person who's going to be really like cynical about Ubisoft, and I do think that we all need to look at it through that marketing side. Talk about the fact, you know, how Assassin's Creed Valhalla was approached in its marketing, like, you know, all the scummy tactics that we used, which I can do a video on if you want me to, but like, it's absurd. I think that I want to just try and at least be a little bit more, just give them the benefit of the doubt for this situation, and let's hope that Mirage is something that is promised. I will get it on release and then make some videos and video essays about the game. See if that is something that interests you. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more content around that. But the issues highlighted in this video weren't all the issues around Ubisoft, but simply talking about the year of 2014, which for me is a really interesting year for two reasons. One is what I've just discussed for the whole video, and the other is the way that people look back on these games and the games that came before that, like Assassin's Creed 3. A lot of people view this year as one of the most underrated years in Ubisoft's history. Something that I find very fascinating, because a lot of people now look back at all of the old games by Ubisoft and realize, you know what, they're actually decent. Maybe they were made a little bit before their time, and they should have been given a little bit of extra time. For example, I think if they had waited a little bit longer for Unity to release, a little bit longer for WatchDogs to release, and honestly Rouge to release, and put a little bit more effort into it, just imagine the year that would have been those three games coming out alongside like a Far Cry game, alongside whatever else they wanted to go into. I think they could have had a great year. However, like I said, this is not all the issues around Ubisoft. We obviously have all of the sexual assault issues that went on, where they got rid of loads of people because of that, and the massive hyper monetization. Now obviously, the sexual assault side of it is definitely the worst of those two evils, but I'd definitely say the monetization is something that needs to be spoken about more, especially discussing Ubisoft, because they've effectively taken over the reins of EA's role in the gaming industry of being the scummy monetary gain people of this entire industry. But yeah, if you do want me to make a video discussing everything from the like inception of Ubisoft through to kind of what seems to be the key events leading up to everything that eventually brings you into this year of 2014, and then to modern day times of 2023, and all of the stuff that went over in the last like 2 years, then let me know in the comments down below. If you guys did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and do subscribe for more content on this channel. If you want to become a member and see some exclusive content, make sure to join as well below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.